That homestead just this side of the cross near the intersection. Just a mile on the hillside.
Oh,
The homestead
But
number
it's lemon
17.
cookies with it.
Right across the street.
Then the
On Box Hill, first place.
oh, okay.
I lived there a long
I
time.
never had any of those before.
they just
So
help you right away.
I was raised way out there towards the, did you ever heard of the Passaic area?
I was raised in.
Is there still somebody that's participating from afar?
That's,
I asked
Patty?
yeah, that's.
I asked Ardith if Patty was gonna join in, but she said she doesn't know. She tried to call her. This was a while ago.
Hi, Clarence.
Hello, Eddie.
Hey. No, I tried to email her. I did not get a response back, but
Yeah.
sometimes when people get my email, because it says crazy woman on it, they all go, no, I'm not opening that. So, in fact, I have diffused more angry people on the other end of the telephone when I'm calling about a problem. When they ask for my email address and I say, before I ever get to the @ I say, it's crazy woman, and there's a smirk. I can hear them laugh. I know that they're gonna laugh. It has saved me a lot of grief. When I tell them that my email is that.
Okay, lady, okay.
And so then, but that also triggers some resistance
Delete.
to opening the email because they don't know, why would anybody call themselves crazy woman? And I've had to assure them that's where I live, not who I am.
Do they believe you?
Well, it depends on what I have to say to them. But, I wanted to share something with you that, several weeks ago, there's a website that I get articles from. And this last week, they've been focusing on what I wish I knew. Or what I wish I had known, really is what it means. But I thought I would share this because I thought this was really relevant to us and our thinking through things. He said this particular day was about writing. And there were several things that it says. The most useful lessons tend to come down to mindset shifts or specific lessons, two of which I really wish I had known when I started out as a writer. First, this from an open thread, which is part of an email reference, on wisdom that writers would share with their younger selves. Quote, everyone's writing gets better with editing, revising and correcting and that kind of stuff. I would add, everyone's writing gets better by writing. The more you write, the better you get. My sister has been writing a lot of stuff over the last number of years since she came back from Ethiopia. And every time she has improved, her writing has changed so much that, before I was fairly cautious because she didn't want my critique. She just wanted me to read it. But the last few times that I've gotten something from her, I just was sort of stunned by the beauty of the writing that she had done. And I just said, Joan, I am just, and I thought, we just need to know that we're going to get better by writing. And then my younger sister came a week ago. Did I share that story about the pie making? Maybe I didn't. Hey. Well, my mother was a master at pie making. I mean, she could make a pie and have it in the oven in less than 15 minutes. Crust and start to finish.
Wow.
She canned a lot, so she had all this stuff. And I remember, if we have time, I'll open this up and read it to you. So last week at my other writing group, Beverly came with it, and the prompt that I gave that group was something to the effect of, how hard can it be? And Beverly told me later, she said, I knew the instant I heard that prompt what I was gonna write about. And in a matter of less than an hour or two, she wrote this piece about my mom teaching her how to make pie pressed. And I may just print it off and give it to you later, but it is hysterical. And I couldn't believe how, she said, I'm guilty, or I have this problem with a blank screen, blank piece of paper problem. I look at the screen and I can't think of anything to write. But it took her about a half an hour to write this piece about my mom making pie and how difficult it was. And I thought, okay, so it doesn't require anything other than just a little nudge, and people can do all kinds of things. So I encourage you to just keep writing. We will be working through that. But anyway, I just wanted to, you guys are doing amazing work, and I'm really, really impressed. So just keep writing, be prepared. And the other thing is write, and then edit. Editing does not happen while you're writing it. You get it all down, and then you go back and fix it. Don't try to fix it while you're writing, or you'll never get it done. It's just better to get it all down and then worry
How
about
many
it.
times do you have to go over?
Well, that is a different matter.
Problem.
But,
25 or 30.
I will tell you, Edie, by getting yours written down, you have something to work with.
Yeah.
If you don't ever write it down, then you have nothing to work from.
Yeah.
And that is really an important part of writing. So with that said, we're going to start with you, Gladys, because I wanted to hear from you since you were not able to make it for the first couple of sessions.
Which one do you want me?
I don't care which one you pick one.
Well, I'll tell you, it's rather lengthy, and it's the historic event.
Okay. Well, you hit it, and if I think if you run out of time, or if I think you're going over,
You can stop me.
I'll stop you, but I think you're good.
Saturday morning, September 11th, 2021, I placed a large cast iron skillet on the large burner and put some oil in it to heat and turned on the burner. While it was heating, I ran down to check my mail. I got sidetracked and chatting with another resident when all of a sudden the fire alarm went off. I ignored the instructions that we were to leave the building by the nearest exit, and I ran for the stairs. I dashed into my apartment to find filled with smoke and the sprinkler system spraying water all over the kitchen and into the living room through the door between the living room and the kitchen. The firemen arrived, and one picked up my dishpan and put it over the sprinkler head to direct the water down to the sink. By that time he did that, the water on the floor was about an inch deep or so, spreading through the apartment and running through the door, under the door, across the hall to the water then actually went under the door and ran into the apartment across the hall. They finally found the turn off for the sprinkler system. The firemen then checked that was all clear, and they left. Jeremy came with the shop vac to suck the water up off the floor. I checked the bowl of my large mixer was sitting on my kitchen rolling cart. The water in there looked like I had dumped my mop water after cleaning a very dirty kitchen floor. The water had been in the pipes since the apartments were built in 1986. The next thing I knew, Jeremy had removed the screen from the bedroom window and pitched his vacuum cleaner out the window. I never did find out why, but I think it quit working. But where did all the water go? It was no longer on the floor and had not been vacuumed up. It had to go somewhere. It seeped into the apartment, the vacant apartment below, that had just been renovated. And new kitchen cabinets, new floors, been repainted and was ready to rent. The water had soaked into the sheetrock, and the bedroom and the living room, that would have to be replaced, and I was responsible for the cost. Carmen came and called for a company from Gillette called Master Clean. They came and late in the afternoon, and I was informed that I had 1 hour to pack up enough to live for 2 or 3 weeks outside of the apartment. They were going to put in an ozone machine in the apartment that night to get rid of the smoke smell. It would be in there for about 24 hours. Now I had to find a place to stay. I couldn't afford a hotel, and I mentally went through my list of friends to see who might be willing to take me for a couple of weeks. I finally settled on Donna Johnson, a member of my Bible study group, and called her and explained the situation. She said yes. Lon Howell gave me a duffel bag, and I packed my clothes, an overnight bag, my computer, a bag of knitting, and my tatting. Lon took me to Donna's house and helped me carry her stuff into her basement. He insisted on taking us both out to eat. After eating, he took us back to Donna's house. I unpacked my things and her spare bedroom in the basement, which had a bathroom across the hall. On Sunday the 12th, I went to the senior center for lunch, visited with Maddie briefly, and then sat outside the apartments, waiting for my daughter's friend Mary B to come and pick up my car, which I had sold to her boss's son the previous weekend. I signed the bill of sale, and he gave me a check for $1,000. The car was a 1994 Mercury Sable with 290,000 miles on the odometer. I learned from the VIN number in the blue book that this was the top line of the Mercury cars that year. It was listed resale worth $1,300. Other Mercury cars listed that year were worth $300. Then I went back to Donna's. Bright and early Monday morning, I was on my way to Rapid City with the chauffeur for an appointment with Dr. Abraham at Black Hills Regional Eye Institute. There was an emergency that day, and my appointment was delayed. We did not get back to Buffalo until 5:45 p.m. I had a resident council meeting at 6 p.m. As secretary, I had to be there to take notes. Picked up my mail, and later Teresa took me to Donna's house. What a day. Master Clean had called on Tuesday morning, telling me I needed to sign some kind of form. He asked about the deductible and that I would need to pay for the cleaning. They had had this temporary storage unit moved to the back driveway. He asked about what to do with food that might freeze if put in the unit. I arranged with him to put these things in my in-apartment storage unit, and each apartment has a separate storage area. I was given a key to the lock on the storage unit. Since I'd sold my car, it was necessary to cancel the car insurance. Along that line, I called my daughter Kathy about my renter's insurance with Safeco. When I had canceled my house insurance after I sold the house, my insurance agent suggested that I get renter's insurance, which was very reasonable, not knowing that someday I really would need it. On September 26th, the neighbor called and told me that they could not move my small 5 cubic foot freezer. I decided to check the apartment, and I decided to check the rest of the apartment. Only things on the floor of the living room closet, the coat closet, the kitchen closet, and my linen storage, and the storage between the bathroom and the closed bedroom closet were removed, just the things on the bottom. The nightstand had been placed in the storage closet. In addition to the deep freeze not being moved, my cabinet sewing machine, my rolling kitchen counter, and the workstation and the large dresser still in the apartment. These should have been moved to the storage unit. Somewhere along the line, the apartment office called and told me what the cost of the repairs that I was responsible. They took half of my September rent because I moved out. I had to leave on the 12th. My security deposit, my October rent payment, and $20,000 that they should come in, that the insurance money, which covered the estimate of repairs to apartment 201 and 209 and 109. My daughter did most of the negotiation with the insurance company for me. Then it was a long time of waiting. I checked weekly for my status of being able to return. I was never told that I would not be able to move my things to another place. Finally, on late January 2022, after almost 5 months at Donna's, I had a meeting with Carmen regarding a new apartment. I was assigned to apartment 111, which had been refloored and repainted. There was a new security deposit, the February rent that had to be paid. Jeremy was to move the things from the storage closet and other closets in apartment 209. I was responsible for my personal items from the bedroom closet and the bathroom. I made arrangements with church for some people to move my furniture from the external storage unit to apartment 111. February 10th, I talked to Nathan Nash, and he came to check to find out how much had to be removed. By February 14th, I talked with Nathan again, and he said he would call me when he had a crew. February 16th, a Wednesday, he called me at 8 in the morning and said the crew would be there at 2 p.m. He arrived with Dan Gay, Mike Moon, and Robin Fredley. I had talked to Ronnie Hansen, and he came to help. Ronnie and Robin stationed themselves in the storage unit. The others moved the items using a moving cart that Jeremy had provided, the shopping cart, and hand carry. My job was to tell them where to put things as they came into the apartment. Boxes go here, boxes go there, the bed goes here, the dressers go there. It took them exactly 45 minutes to completely empty the storage unit. I remember Dan Gay pushing my old oak teacher's desk fitted with casters down the hallway, saying, "This is it." My daughter called saying that my two daughters called and said that they were coming with 2 grandchildren on Friday to help me unpack. They unpacked everything, putting everything away. They had gone to Walmart and picked up a new landline phone, a new stepladder, and with rails around it, and some other food items. After all the unpacking was done, I was told to list. I took the list of things that they had checked as discarding and checked the items which, as we unpacked, missing was a hand-made laminated cutting board, which was a gift from my cousin who was a cabinet maker, a soil moisture tester, a 2-ounce measuring glass, a blue plastic lap desk with mail in it, a stepladder, a cake carrier, and a tall glass vase, plus 2 cast iron skillets that they'd added to the list at the last minute. Found in the boxes was canned tomato sauce, canned apple pie sauce, and apple pie filling, which was supposed to have been put in my in-house storage unit. They were frozen. Among the discarded items included 2 cream-colored 11-inch Lazy Susans, one of which was a 2-tiered unit. The top was supported by 4-inch bolts and the 2 cast iron skillets. One skillet was part of my mother's old 90-year-old Dutch oven, which had been a wedding present. The other one, which she gave me after I married, and an 8-inch skillet, which was over 50 years old. This was a lesson on being careful when you're cooking, because if left untended, you never know the consequences.
Wow. Wow. So what are your responses to her piece? It was her historic event.
Maybe too much detail.
It had a little bit too much detail.
I could have shortened it, but it had to cover the 5 months.
It seemed like something you would give your insurance company, because it talked about it. Everything was very laid out. It was very detailed as to what was missing, what was there, how much effort it was put into it. What I was wishing I heard was what those items meant to you, rather than the history of the item. What happened with that pan that made it so special to you, or that type of thing. So I wish that you would use that same one and then explain what the people, what happened with those items.
Yeah, and some of it you did have in there, like it was your mother's.
The one thing that I couldn't figure out was why the stepladder disappeared.
Okay, well, Gladys, I'm gonna ask that you wait to respond till you hear everybody's comments and think about what they're saying. And those might be things that when we start talking about editing, what kinds of editing process.
I wrote this out,
Yeah, and it's the
And
first draft, so,
and I've got to figure out on my computer so I can do double spacing.
that will, yeah, and I
And
can
then
help
I
you.
can edit.
But I would say that right now, just receive the remarks that people make and consider maybe the things that they're telling you, you can either puff out or take out. So other comments with regard to what you heard her describe? Other
Her
remarks?
personal feelings about all this, I think there's some in there, but not
Oh, you're saying you could see that having her add some more of her emotions?
yet.
Okay,
Just what a tragic thing to go through.
yes,
It's how do you get over something like that?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, that's
overcome all that
important.
difficulty and whatever.
yeah, because it's a landmark event, certainly, and it's very factual. But the idea of, some of the specifics that she includes, we can read into just the tough place she
How
found
tough it
herself.
was.
The financial side was a really telling part. Other comments? Yeah,
You can see it as 2 parts to this, and the first part describing the emergency and the crisis, and everything would take you to a certain point where the story would end, and you started into another story about the details of you might share with an insurance company.
Divided into 2 things.
Yeah, you got two stories going there. To me, it kind of seemed like.
and the recuperation or the
Yeah.
restoration of your life is an important part.
Yeah,
There were 2 things that I thought you mentioned the detail, but I think this is one of those places where you can learn to, one, partly tie into the emotional side of it. But one of the 2 things that I thought were really important was the significance of family helping you out, and the significance of your church family and the people who were your friends who bailed out, they just jumped in. And I think, like Jane mentions, in your piece, you might reflect on the gifts of what those people did for you
And how
instead of the focus on all of the detail of what was missing or what was in the room, but rather the realization of why was this so valuable as an experience? What can you gain out of it?
How did it affect her, you know?
Yeah, there you go. How did it affect you? So that, because I was listening to you and thinking, your daughter navigating the insurance for you was huge.
What a relief that was.
That was a big gift. And then when your family shows up and provides you with things that are missing, and then just this incredible gift of friends from the church. How powerful that is for us as people to know that we are cared about like that. 45 minutes to move your whole house, basically, is a big deal.
Well,
That would
I was
enrich
just-
this.
What's that?
Time,
Those things would enrich her story.
Yes.
at the time, I couldn't believe that they had unloaded all that stuff in that much time.
Yeah, and I think that
And they
that's.
were so surprised that they, look, we got it done in this.
So
And then-
those are the kind of things, Gladys, as you were writing, that give yourself permission to write down some of the things that you feel.
Okay.
That will help the reader feel something too.
I was impressed that you knew what was missing. I would say, and a month or two later, where's my frying pans?
Yeah, and I think that Lois points out the fact that some of those objects are important, and that's why you miss them. What is it that makes them so important? You miss something and then,
There's other things that were missing too, but I didn't, these were things that I used.
okay,
And that's why, and the one thing that really bugged me was the stepladder. It wasn't put in the storage unit, but it was gone. And I laughed at, it must have got legs and walked off.
well,
Put
and
that in there.
yeah, so and those are the kind of things that, the emotional reaction that just, sometimes it's the fact that it is sort of trivial. It isn't a big deal, and yet it affects us. And so you can put that kind of thing in there to give us a sense of that feeling. When Dave was writing about his experiences in Chicago and this place that a lot of it, there was maybe more detail at the beginning than, we felt like it was absolutely necessary. And yet the descriptions of that place gave us a strong sense of that feeling that he had about the various, the rundown quality and but at the same time, the place that he knew well. And so your emotion can be conveyed by what details you choose to include, and not, you don't need to tell us everything that's in the desk drawer for us to know that the desk drawer is like a teenage locker, so, there are all kinds of stuff you can do to help us feel that and not necessarily go into so much detail. So, but yeah, that's obviously a really, you think about a fire, and it doesn't matter whether it's her fire or the fire that happened this last summer. Fire is one of the most frightening, devastating things because you lose things that you can't get back.
Yeah.
There is no restoration, and the water did damage, but nothing like having, fire just consume stuff. So yeah, that's, okay. So, we're gonna jump to Clarence because he missed last week.
Well, I don't know. I'm probably off the trail.
No, there's no trail.
I went back and see, this first writing I did triggered my brain. And I found out I left out a lot of things. So I went back from the beginning and filled in all these things that I left out, and I think some of them will be of interest. But so here goes. Charles Bishop arrived with his family on an immigrant train to Clearmont, Wyoming in 1919. They made it to the homestead 25 miles southeast of Buffalo on Trabing Road. Dad, his two brothers, and his brother-in-law all ended up with homesteads. The first 10 years were good moisture and good crops. The drought and the depression came at about the same time. Charles and Doris Davis were married June 25th, 1933 in Buffalo, Wyoming. Charles and Doris spent the rest of the summer living in a tent while putting up hay on the Hess Ranch. My mother always remembered how good the trout tasted that she caught out of the irrigation ditch. Charles and Doris spent the winter living in a sheep wagon while Dad fed sheep for the Smith brothers. I was born November 12, 1934, in grandfather's small white cabin on the back of what is now 344 North DeSmith Avenue. I was soon taken home by my parents to the homestead known as the Dry Farm, 25 miles southeast of Buffalo, across Crazy Women Creek on Trebin Road. My grandparents lived in Buffalo and we had little contact with them. I was the first son born to Charles and Doris Bishop. I was raised on cow's milk straight from the cow. The only water was in a reservoir about 1/8 of a mile away. A 55-gallon barrel was on a sled pulled by a team of horses, was taken to the reservoir, dipped full of water, and pulled back to the house. The family had very little contact with the rest of the world, with the exception of my dad going to work for some neighbors. Many things came by mail that came 3 times a week. The plan was to go to Buffalo once a month in a green Model A Ford Roadster. Brother Don was born July 29th, 1936. I have no real memory of this. I do remember that he was a sickly small child and had to have goat's milk. I remember playing outside and getting in trouble like the time we fed the cookies to the goats through the wire fence. Once when Dad was away from home, the house had a chimney fire. Mother crawled up in the attic and I handed her pails of water. She got the fire out. I do not remember the first time I rode a horse, but I remember Dad had me ride down a ridge while the antelope watched me. He got close and shot one. It was important to get a good shot. Cartridges cost 10 cents. Dad always said we would have starved to death if it had not been for antelope. There was no refrigeration. Dad would cut blocks of ice off the reservoir, put it in an ice house, and cover it with coal slack. Pigs were raised, butchered, the ham, shoulders, and bacons were sugar cured and put in a large box of salt. Many chickens were raised, both for meat and eggs. Baby chickens would come to the mailbox in the spring. There was a large reservoir that had a pipe running through the dam. There was a vegetable garden below the dam, irrigated with that water. The vegetables were canned for later use. Brother Everett was born December 1st, 1939. We lived with grandparents waiting for his birth. I remember watching Chris Johnson deliver the milk with the horse and wagon. It came in glass bottles. While waiting for Everett's arrival, I attended kindergarten for a few weeks, which was held in the basement of the library, which houses a museum today. This was my first encounter with other children. Brother Don was born July 29th, 1936. Now I'm starting over again. I guess I got 2 pages of the same thing. In 1940, the family moved to a ranch on Johnson Creek, about 10 miles north of Buffalo, to a place known as the Schrader Place. The owner had died and the place was terribly run down. Pearl Harbor was bombed December 7th, 1941. I remember the adults standing around the little radio trying to understand what was going on. Soon after that, many things were rationed: sugar, shoes, gasoline, and many things. One of the main reasons to move was to be close to a school for me. The Lower Johnson Creek School was about a half mile from home. I walked to school. When I was in the first grade, there were 2 other boys in school. Attendance varied sometimes as many as 8. My first teacher was Miss Lois Harrison. My first encounter with an adult, not a family member. She was a very good teacher. There were 2 teachers for the second grade. Mrs. Emma Ann Starr Butler was 3rd grade teacher. She was of retirement age and didn't pay much attention to what went on. The 4th grade teacher was a good teacher, but grossly overweight. Her name was Mrs. Cruz. One day she looked down at my little brother and said, "Little bitty Donald." He looked up her and said, "Big fat Mrs. Cruz." She said not a word. The last 3 years we had Miss Leora Everson, who would have been Dr. Ruby's grandmother. She was the best. The schoolhouse had a big old-fashioned heating stove. The older boys would carry firewood, coal, and pump water. My sister was born while on the Schrader place, Rosa in 41 and Jerry in 43. Mother got a new washing machine with a Briggs & Stratton engine. It was my job to take care of it. I started working in the field at a young age. I drove the stacker team when I was 7 that pulled the hay up on the stack. When 8, I drove a buck rake that brought the hay in from the field. I had never heard of a skunk on the dry farm. One evening when I was out bringing in the cows, I saw this animal and I decided to catch it. I got close enough to put my foot on his tail. That was a mistake. I wasn't welcome when I got home. The family moved from the Schrader place to a place on Rock Creek in 1943. This place was purchased from my mother's aunt and had been in the family since 1908. We moved in the early spring. Several of us were by team and wagon. I remember how cold it was sitting up there and driving the team. I was obsessed with wanting to mow hay with a horse-drawn mower, which I did when I was 9. I started plowing with a Ford tractor when I was 10. My dad bought a new John Deere tractor in 1947. I thought that was the most wonderful thing in the world. I spent many hours on it both day and night. I started to learn to flood irrigate when I was about 12. During the blizzard of 49, the teacher lived in the school. I drove a team of horses and picked up the neighbor kids on the way. I started high school in the fall of 1949 in Buffalo. I was in a class of about 50 kids, an overwhelming experience. I drove a pickup to school and hauled milk to the creamery for the neighbor. There was about 6 to 8 10-gallon cans. I would leave the milk at the creamery before school and pick up the empties after school. The dasher would come out of the ice cream freezer, which was about the size of a 55-gallon drum. They would give us spoons and let us scrape off ice cream. Agriculture and FFA were my interest. I was obsessed about learning to weld, which was to become a big part of my life. The most influential person in my life was probably the ag instructor, Mr. John Driscoll. I won a trip to the National FFA convention for myself and the instructor. The award was for soil conservation work. The trip to Kansas City, my first time to ride a train from Sheridan, and the first time to see television. And that's as far as I got.
That's good.
Well, once again, Clarence, you did a good job of describing a generation and how they lived before me, and I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's just great you're writing that down.
Yeah, well, my family been kind of needling me to do this, and this kind of got me kicked off center.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there is so much information there. That's just wonderful.
Very good.
So what are some things that you picked? You mentioned just the history of all these people and their growing. What else did you pick up on, Meredith?
He's 7 years old and he's running the stacker, and I
Yeah.
know what a stacker is, so I can just envision him doing that. And graduating to the hay rake, I know what that was like because my dad was also doing those things on the farm growing up. And so I have pictures of my dad, running a stacker and running the rake, and so I can really envision you doing that, Clarence.
I'm going to mention that last week when Meredith was reading her story about her family, and you were talking about the children working,
Yes.
here we have it. It really isn't that far away as far as generational, farm work was, you maybe weren't farmed out exactly, but I bet you didn't make a lot of money from your dad.
Oh, no.
No.
It was free labor.
Well, in that generation or back then, families were a big part of the labor force.
Yes, exactly right. Yeah, so that was interesting. What else did you pick up on as you were listening?
Good sense of humor and a lot of
I was confused about the big paddle with the ice cream. I don't know how that tied in with your story.
Well, it
came from the creamery.
was about going to the creamery,
Yeah.
and when we go to get the empty cans, it'd be about the right time for that to come out of the freezer.
Oh, okay. So you need to put that in there because
Yeah.
I lost you right there.
Oh, okay.
didn't quite understand what was happening.
Why did you get ice cream that?
Huh?
Why did you get ice cream at that time of day? And
Well, it was available and they was generous and we
Oh,
took
yeah.
advantage of it.
Well, that's what I say, but when you flipped into that, it didn't tie in real good, so you kind of need to.
Left a gap there, yeah.
And I think that keep in mind that hardly anyone has ever really seen a creamery. This is a generational thing. There's like a gap.
Yeah.
The creamery was in Buffalo when I was growing up, but the actual practice and the activity wasn't something that most of us got to see. So that in and of itself, you could probably blow out of you could expand on that bit of information for the reader to just understand it a little bit better.
I felt like a lot of this was journaling, and I just wrote down some things like to expand on food. He talked about antelope, he talked about irrigation and all, but what was his role in the family with raising and providing for the family in the way of food? Also, it struck me as the reservoir would be a theme. Did he play in it? Did he hunt frogs in it? Were there parties on it in the wintertime? So that's a possible one. What was his reactions and feelings? How did it affect him over time? His meeting other kids for
Yeah.
Oh,
when he
that
went to school. I thought there was a myriad stories in what I felt like was journaling.
Yep, and he's got you could literally make breaks in your story and fill in the gaps. I was thinking about some of the things you just mentioned, Frank. One of them is, how many of you have ever seen flood irrigating? And how many of you ever done it? I'll tell you what,
I tried. A
That-
dry farmer can.
when you, the flood irrigating, when you have to haul those tarps and you have to move them and position them, all I can imagine was you were 12 years old when you
Yeah.
flood irrigate. You had to be one strong little person, and you probably had help, but my gosh, those things they weigh a ton. And you
We
have to
didn't-
move.
We didn't use that.
You didn't flood irrigate with the dam?
No, we just put in earthen dams wherever we needed them.
And I was gonna mention that too. The reservoir that he's talking about is on our property. And they were all built with plows and Fresnos, and they dammed up these drainages that frankly, they're dry a lot of the times during the year. But what is interesting is you mentioned the head gate that was in it.
Yeah,
Not all of them today have head gates, but originally a lot of those guys in that era, they were storage, but they would control how much water could go in and out of those earthen dams. And we have one left on our property, but that one that you're talking about, we call the bishop. That's the name of the reservoir,
Yeah,
is the bishop, but his dad built more than one. There were several big ones that he did. So,
yeah, well, he built them for other people.
yeah, he did, but there was one that he built that's still used. It's one of our main reservoirs in our
Yeah.
drainage. So that was cool. I was gonna mention something that Gladys mentioned, and I like the fact that you mentioned their last names. I was thinking to myself how important it is that when you have a book that's historical or you have a journal, memoirs, people will read a book looking for their own story in that place. And one of the key things, unless you're trying to avoid being really negative and you don't want to draw attention to something terrible that somebody did, the fact is, if you put their last names in, it helps another family find their story in your story. And I love the fact that you mentioned Dr. Ruby's grandmother being your teacher. That kind of thing is really, those are important parts of our being of retained history. So I like that part too. That was good. Other comments, because I want to ask Jane, do you have something you want to share before you leave? Do you have, or can you just leave it with me and I can read it, if that's okay? If you don't have time, if we don't have time.
I just have a question to ask everybody. I'm writing a family history, basically, it's kind of in story form. My mother, father, my grandparents both immigrated from Russia. They are Germans, but they came from Russia way back at the turn of the century. And I was trying to put down, why were they in Russia? What was that all about, And so I started there, but I thought, I didn't know if I should start in Russia or start in the United States, work backwards, or go there and work forward.
You can do it a couple of different ways. If you want to focus on your family in the United States, you can do kind of like Meredith did. She was going back and talking about some of her family history, but you might expand on it in a different writing project. But if you were just trying to get information about your family here, you would include a paragraph that would maybe explain your original family members that immigrated to the United States, that they were they were originally German, but because of political circumstances had lived in Russia and they immigrated from Russia. Right. You can do a little short paragraph that explains the historical side of that, and then maybe save that particular whole story for another writing project.
See that?
Or another.
And I didn't know where to begin.
Yes.
And so I wrote a big piece starting in Russia and how it came to be that all these Russians moved to, Germans rather moved to Russia. Mm-hmm. And my ancestors were part of that group that moved there. And eventually they stayed there, and several generations later they left there for the United States because circumstances had changed so greatly, and start over in the United States.
And there is something, just as a thing to mention. Sometimes the whole idea of a family, you've talked about the dysfunction in your family in that piece you sent to me, but there's sort of that idea that you have a story about your family and the fact that they follow a kind of a theme, and that maybe with writing your story, you talk about the fact that this is a family that is constantly prepared to relocate. That becomes a theme.
Yeah.
And you can actually use that as your narrative to talk about that, and you start with the Russian piece. Now, did they start in Germany first and
Yes.
then move to Russia?
Yes.
So probably if you're going to do it that way, then you might explain they were in Germany, where they were in Germany, and why they moved to Russia, and then why they were there, how long they were in Russia, and then when did they come to the United States. So you could probably do it chronologically. That would work.
That's kind of what I've done.
Okay.
But,
Yeah, and if you'll, Jane, do you have email?
yes.
You could just email me that, and then I could read it.
Okay.
So for next time, because I think I gave everyone my email address. So.
Okay.
Okay, that would be great. So, Frank, you were missing last week, so I wanted to hear from you. I'm kind of trying to go in the order of making sure everybody gets a hearing, and then we'll go from there. So,
June 15th, 12:15, signing of the Magna Carta. August 2nd, 1776, the first signature penned on the Declaration of Independence. November 11th, 1918, Armistice Day. September 2nd, 1945, Japanese surrender. September 23rd, 1971, the end of an education in a parallel universe. Historical dates all. Most American school children are familiar with the first of these significant dates, but the last surely causes some head scratching and a puckered brow or two. So here's the story. He, let's call him James, was the second to disembark from the Flying Tigers Douglas DC-8. More than 250 passengers were still waiting to leave the plane, walk across the tarmac, and start the process of getting on with the rest of their lives. James stopped, then stepped aside to let the other passengers by. He didn't know what he should do. Somewhere between Guam and Oakland, a terrible realization had pounded his brain, taken his breath, and left what had seemed like good luck looking like a muddled mess. Approximately 38 hours earlier, he had been randomly selected to fill one of the vacant seats on the flight that had just landed in Oakland. The early departure, more than 24 hours ahead of schedule, seemed like a great bit of luck. Now he had landed in Oakland slightly more than a day ahead of schedule. In his mind, he knew the early arrival and the fact that he had crossed the international date line could play havoc with his immediate plans. James followed some of the men into the building where signs directed incoming passengers to different lines. Most of the passengers were queuing up in the lines for reassignment. A few were in line below an EAS, end of active service sign. Meanwhile, James had extended his active duty in country so that his date of return from overseas service was within 90 days of his end of active service. Neither line looked good to him. He was looking for a sign that read discharge. No sign, no line. He started to wander the hallways and ran into a captain who appeared to be permanent party. Sir, can you tell me where the office is that processes servicemen leaving the service? Did you just come in on that flight there, soldier? Yes, sir, and I only saw the two lines forming in the receiving bay for either reassignment or EAS. Well, you should probably be in one of those two lines. Are you being reassigned to another duty station or leaving active duty? Neither, sir. I'm being discharged. What type of discharge have you received? With a puzzled look, may I see your orders? An honorable discharge, and here are my orders, sir. The captain looked James' orders over and leafed through them. This is unusual. Follow me. I can show you the office where you need to go to get your answer. Before we go, sir, may I ask a question about orders? My orders? I don't know that I can answer a question about personnel matters, but I'll give it a try. Sir, if my date for mustering out is tomorrow and I start processing today, can I be reassigned? After a long look and a hint of a smile, the captain said, I guess you aren't looking for a military career. I suppose that technically the Army could reassign you since you still have a day of active duty before your orders show you being discharged. It is highly unlikely, however, that would happen, but you can get a better answer from the office I'll show you. Follow me. James followed the captain, who handed him back his orders, pointed out the office, and wished him good luck as he walked away. James took note of the office and decided there was always a tomorrow that didn't have a technically attached. He went back down the hallway, through the receiving bay, and outdoors. Crossing the international date line and arriving a day early certainly created some logistics that could be put off until another day. He asked a passing soldier where he might find a canteen. Follow me and I'll point it out. With a thank you, James entered the canteen, ordered a chicken fried steak meal, and sat down to think. That word technically sounded a lot like it could happen in this man's army, no matter how small the likelihood. Finishing the meal, a plan in place, James headed back toward the office the captain had pointed out. Instead of going back to the office, he stopped at the receiving bay. In the receiving bay, there was a lot of seating, including several benches. He sat down on the most comfortable looking bench, took out his book, and prepared for an overnight camp out. During the night, another plane arrived and returning servicemen were milling about awaiting processing. James was approached by one of the processing clerks and asked if he was going to cross through with the new arrivals. He assured the questioner that he was going to go through processing first thing in the morning. That was first thing in the morning. But he would be doing it in another section of the building that would be opening at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. The clerk told James that the center was going to be closing in a few minutes and not opening until 800 hours the next day. James asked if there was any problem with camping out on the bench until then, and the clerk told him to suit himself. At 800 hours, James had been waiting in front of the personnel office a short while before the office opened. He walked in, presented his orders, and went through out processing without a hitch. Shortly before noon, September 23rd, 1971, James left the parallel universe in which he had lived for the previous 21 months and rejoined the real world. But that's another story.
The fuzzy lines of military requirements. Okay, so what are your first thoughts about this piece?
I could see this place where James was. It was really good description and how he felt about it and everything. I thought you described it perfectly.
Yeah, I thought it was really good too. You're a writer and you just didn't know it.
So other thoughts about what he wrote or about the place that he found himself in? Did you understand that sensation?
Yeah.
What he was, were you guys in the military? I assume you were. You were not. So Claire, where did you serve?
I was in the Navy and served off the West Coast and over to Japan and Indochina.
And what period of time were you there?
53 to 57.
Okay, so would that have been under the Korean?
Tail of the end of the Korean War.
Yeah. So, do you have a feel for what?
Oh, I could just almost, I could see it, yeah.
And that sense of the technical, that word technically?
The frustration that goes with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm mean on dealing with that sort of stuff in the Philippines. I ran through the same sort of a deal, knowing that, yeah, if I go and check into this office early, I'm gonna end up somewhere where I don't. So definitely wait until, the proper days.
Yeah, it sounds similar to the story that my husband told about his Navy experience. And he was supposed to be discharged in so many months, and they put him in, he said, inventorying the bar, and he said that just didn't interest him. And then he got this call. He was a machinist on the Navy, and the captain was not leaving until he had a machinist, and so Carl was called back, and he ended up being discharged and flew from Tokyo, I think it was, back to the States when his time was up. But the interesting thing, the guy was not leaving without a machinist.
I was going to ask you if you wouldn't mind rereading the first, I would say probably the first 12 lines of what you read.
Including the dates at the top or not?
From the beginning, yeah. I needed to hear that again.
June 15th, 12:15, the signing of the Magna Carta. August 2nd, 1776, The first signature pinned on the Declaration of Independence. November 11th, 1918, Armistice Day. September 2nd, 1945, Japanese surrender. September 23rd, 1971, the end of an education in a parallel universe. Historical dates all. Most American children are familiar with the first of these significant dates, but the last surely causes some head scratching and a puckered brow or two. So here's the story.
Okay, then keep reading for just another couple of lines, Mike.
He, let's call him James, was the second to disembark from the Flying Tigers Douglas DC-8. More than 250 passengers were still waiting to leave the plane, walk across the tarmac, and start the process of getting on with the rest of their lives. James stopped then, stepped aside to let the other passengers by. He didn't know what he should do. Somewhere between Guam and Oakland, a terrible realization had pounded his brain, taken his breath, and left what seemed like good luck looking like a muddled mess.
Okay. I confess that beginning is like the beginning of a novel. It feels like you're setting us up. But because we went from Magna Carta to Guam and Oakland, there was this jump that I found myself trying to wrestle with. What has this all got to do with each other? The historical side of it, yes, you tell us that the students, people are familiar with these first ones. But I thought there would be a relevance to those more particularly than there was. So then when you started talking about this parallel universe, I don't know, I would say that I'd want to have time to read it, to physically read it, but it feels like there's maybe something with these are so concrete, and then we move to a disassociated person that's in that state of confusion. I don't know whether those other events need to have a little bit more relevance, or there needs to be more development about why he's in this state of confusion before we get to the part where he's asking about the technicality of his piece. Maybe, if nothing else, tell us that this James is rereading his orders. Something that gives us a realization that there's a part in this why he feels parallel in a parallel universe.
The one thing I jumped to immediately with the September 1971 date was Vietnam.
Well, I knew that it was Vietnam. I knew it was Vietnam, but
To me, just, his dates, to me is like, if you're a person and you're in the, an American, especially a boy back then, and I'm sure this is common in World War II when everybody was joining up. Those dates to me were important about why we stand up for our country, ourselves and our country. So to me, that was a perfect lead in, and maybe that's just because, of my military service, but I knew exactly, to me, it's like, this is an important date, because this is what we stand for as Americans, it's those kind of things. And so then he's here and boom, and to me, what I said, 1971, like you said, it's Vietnam War, it's all these guys, when they're young, went in there thinking they're going to do this, and it's not. Vietnam was not, it was a weird,
well, it was a parallel universe.
Yeah,
There was a lot of
exactly. It was
strange
a parallel
things, but I
universe, exactly.
think what I found myself, because you're returning from Vietnam,
Yeah.
right? And so in the return of that return, the fact that nobody wanted to, re-experience that mess, they didn't have to. But there was a jump, or there was something there that I found myself going, all right, I have to read it, just listening to it.
In response to your comment about it sounded like the start of a novel, when I started writing it, I was thinking about
A novel.
a very extended story, and I have about 7 or 8 pages that started on this, and I said I can't share that much with them. And so this is a synopsis of it, but kind of like what you were saying, I looked at this as these were significant dates in military history that most kids are at least aware of in the United States. They were all important dates. To me, September 23rd was really important.
Do you have it, and this is why I said that looking at it sometimes makes a difference. Those events are all clustered, it looks like on your paper, but in that portion that begins the story of James, do you separate that in any way so it becomes kind of its own new thought? Like you've got those, I can see from just across the room that you've got 4 historical events that are clustered. Is the event that involves James and his beginning of his parallel universe story, do you start that where there's a little bit of a break and we can see that it's a story? Yeah, looking at that, I just wondered if.
This was part of the
something bigger,
story.
yeah.
This was a little anecdote out of what I look at as writing about my experience in a parallel universe.
And I just, what I'm talking about, Frank, is not that people can't understand what you're saying. If you've read Sherman Alexie, you know, or not Sherman Alexie, but Tim O'Brien, that sense of, have you ever read him? He wrote about his experiences in Vietnam War, and it's very disorientating. It's very much that sense of the parallel universe. The thing about that book, the things they carried is a fascinating story. The same 2 or 3 events are told over and over and over again by all the guys in the platoon. They all have their own version of it. It's the same. It's a great visual, and if you've read much about Vietnam War, it is very disorienting. It is a parallel universe, but I'm looking at it from the reader's or writer's perspective. I'd be interested in just being able to look at how you set it up, because just listening to it, I kept thinking, okay, where am I? You know, and I assumed not too long into it that you were on your way home from Vietnam, but there were some things I thought, okay. And then as you get into the story, it becomes clear as to why he's reluctant to go in and process his paperwork. I can see that. I didn't mean that. It's not clear that way, but I just visually, I like it. So I'd be interested.
And I understand the dates on this anecdote. I thought seriously about leaving that out, but I wanted to end it, well, in the anecdote. I don't see leaving it out in a longer story.
Well, and I could, but if you would let me look at it, I'd be interested in just in how you do it, just because I'm a reader, that's how I process stuff. Just to see it. Edie, question?
Well, I was thinking maybe you could say these dates, you know, are really significant, but my significant date is September.
And these were significant, but since I wasn't there for those, they paled compared to this.
Yes, and I would say that I didn't have a problem with, you know, suggesting those things are historically important, but yours is equally historically important. I just found myself a little bit bumping along at the beginnings. Okay. All right, so let's see, where are we here? So you 3 had not read last time. So we kind of just start over again. Sam, do you want to read today? Do we have enough time for you to read? Do you want to share some portion of what you wrote?
Well, actually, the one I wrote this week is shorter,
Okay.
so it's more family history. I call it the leather trunk in the Winchester lever action 3030. My great-grandfather, Samuel Green Humphrey, was born in Caister-on-the-Sea, England in 1844. He immigrated to the U.S. in 1869. He had 2 sisters living in Missouri, whom he visited on his way out west. He ended up in the Camas area in Idaho. In 1880, he became a quartz miner in Sawtooth, Idaho. In 1883 or so, he went back to England to visit his parents. He returned to the States in 1884, and on his way back to Idaho, he stopped and visited his 2 sisters living in Missouri. He met a young woman there, became infatuated with her. He married Martha Jane Barchie, a woman 20 years his junior. She was 20 and he was 40, and took her out to Idaho with him. He bought her a leather trunk to pack her valuables, mostly clothes, and the new family Bible that had been given to her by her father for the wedding. The leather trunk is 3.5 feet long by 18 inches high, 18 inches deep. It has a thick lid, about 8 inches thick. It has a fold-out inner compartment. The double-sealed compartment would keep the dust and moisture out, protecting the most cherished items. There is a 2-inch thick tray resting on side supports at the top of the bottom section of the trunk. It was used to keep family photos, important documents, and other small items, sort of like the junk drawer found in most kitchens these days. The new family Bible was too big for that tray. The Bible, 11 inches tall, 8 inches wide, and 6 inches thick, was stored in the bottom section of the trunk. Samuel was in need of a new rifle. He would use it to provide food for his new wife and protect them from Indians, if need be, on the wild trip out west. Martha Jane had never been out of Missouri before this, but she was anxious for their new adventure. They settled in Haley, Idaho, where Samuel had purchased some land on the edge of town and built a restaurant and hotel, the Sacagawea Inn. Their first son was born there in 1886. Martha Jane needed help taking care of her new family and the restaurant/hotel. So Samuel went back to Missouri to gather up Martha Jane's family and bring them out to Idaho. He left his new wife and young son to care for the Sacagawea Inn. He took his new Winchester with him, though. Samuel returned to Haley with Martha Jane's parents, sisters, and brothers, along with 16 other families, in March of 1887. His trusty .30-30 still in his possession. He and 2 other men had supplied most of the food for the wagon train of the families heading west. Martha Jane's family didn't want to work to the inn when they arrived in Haley. They wanted to be ranchers. They didn't like Haley too much either. Her brothers and sisters moved to the Camas area looking for ranch land. Her parents didn't want to have anything to do with the inn either. Samuel sold the inn and moved his little family, along with his parents-in-law, to Willow Creek, Idaho. Martha packed all her valuables and clothing, along with the family Bible, in her treasured leather trunk. Samuel carried his cherished Winchester with him wherever he went. 4 more children were born to Samuel and Martha Jane in Willow Creek, Idaho, and the family didn't hang around there long after the 5th child was born. Martha Jane packed up her leather trunk, family Bible, and all, once again. Samuel kept his reliable Winchester with him. They all moved up to Moscow, Idaho, where Samuel and his father-in-law bought a small ranch and family farm just outside the town. 2 more children were born there, Samuel Earl Humphrey in 1901, my grandfather, and a daughter a couple years later. Samuel Green taught all his boys to hunt with that Winchester lever action. It was reliable and durable. The boys kept meat on the table with that rifle. It was used so much the firing pin worn out and was repaired in the teens. The older boys headed off to World War I. When they returned from the war, they didn't return home and had their own M1 Garand rifles now. My grandfather was too young to go to the Great War, so his father gave him the cherished Winchester. Samuel Green died in 1920. Martha Jane lived with her youngest son, my grandfather, and youngest daughter. The ranch proved to be too much work for the small family, so they sold it and bought a smaller family farm closer to town. Martha Jane packed her leather trunk and family Bible for that short move, just like she had in the past. My grandfather took his father's cherished rifle with him. My grandfather bought a grocery and hardware store in Moscow because the farm wasn't providing enough to keep the family fed. In 1926, my grandfather married Iris Mayrow. Her family had moved to Moscow from Fairfield, Illinois, years earlier. My Uncle Art was born in 1927, and my Uncle Bert was born in 1929. Martha Jane decided that the little house was becoming too crowded. She packed her most prized possessions and her family Bible into her leather trunk. She gathered the rest of her belongings, her youngest daughter, Catherine Elizabeth, and moved to Spokane, Washington. The Winchester stayed with my grandfather. My father was born in 1934 and my Uncle D in 1936. All 4 of the boys learned to shoot with that Winchester lever action .30-30. They shared it when hunting season came around. But none of them were really avid hunters. They did it to keep food on the table during the war years. When Martha Jane died in 1950, Samuel Earl, my grandfather, went to her home and packed her most cherished items and the family Bible into the leather trunk. He brought it back to his home to Moscow, Idaho. Growing up and visiting my grandparents in Moscow, I remember Sunday dinners. My grandmother would cook, usually roast chicken, potatoes, gravy, and canned spinach with Miracle Whip on it. That was pretty fancy dinner for us. Sunday dinner with the family. Grandma Iris would set the table and we would all take our seats. Grandpa Earl would stand at the head of the table with the family Bible laid out in front of him. He would open it to a random page and read a passage from it before the meal was served. The leather trunk lived in the upstairs spare bedroom. It had become a toy box stuffed with the favorite toys of my pop and his brothers. A favorite one of mine was a stuffed yellow monkey with a missing eye and a king's tail. Martha Jane had bought that monkey for my pop on his second birthday. My grandfather and pop taught me how to shoot with that old Winchester lever action 30-30. I loved it. I always felt like a cowboy when I had a rifle in my hands. When my grandfather died in 1973, he had willed that Winchester to my pop. The leather trunk full of toys made its way to our house. We were living in Spokane then. The family Bible went to my Uncle Bert, who lived in Tucson, Arizona then. When I bought my first house in 1989, my pop gave me the leather trunk. It was empty, but I found the yellow monkey with a missing eye in another toy box at my pop's house. I put it in the leather trunk. He also gave me the prized Winchester lever action 30-30. I always kept the leather trunk at the foot of my bed. It is filled with my prized possessions. The yellow monkey with the missing eye and king's tail was always perched on top of one of my bookshelves. Cindy and I moved to Buffalo, Wyoming a couple years ago. Of course, the leather trunk came with me. It is in my bedroom, still full of prized possessions. The yellow monkey with one eye and king's tail sits atop my highest bookshelf in my bedroom. The trusty Winchester is in our safe. And you know what else? Last summer, my favorite cousin Connie, Uncle Bert's youngest daughter, visited for a week and brought up the family Bible. Those items have traveled all over the western United States, and here they are once again all together in my bedroom. When I take a look at these cherished items, I'm reminded of the Sunday dinners at Grandma Iris's house. I am reminded of playing with the old-timey toys stored in the leather trunk. I remember walking through the woods with my Grandpa Earl and my pop carrying a Winchester. My Grandpa Earl didn't carry a rifle, he made me do it. My pop carried his much newer Springfield Model 70 30-aught sticks. All we ever shot were targets, pop cans, and beer bottles. It was a lot of fun. As I lie in my bed and I look at these special things, I remember the good times of my childhood. I'm reminded of the tough times that my great-great-grandparents went through.
I love the theme of her packing the leather trunk with the Bible and moving again. And it was just, it kept being repeated, emphasizing the move. I love that you did that. That was great.
And he carried his rifle.
Yeah, it just carried it through the whole story.
Well, and the fact that what I found interesting is that she packed what she thought was important, and his great-grandfather he always had the Winchester. I just thought the parallels to that were really fun.
Yeah.
Really good. So, what else did you notice about this piece?
Perfect heirloom piece.
Yeah, absolutely.
I thought there was an undercurrent of humor in there that with the rifle going back to Missouri, but she stayed out and worked. Yeah. Priorities.
Right.
Yeah, I thought that made me chuckle too. I thought that was clever. That was fun. Other thoughts about how he did his story and what was in it? I kind of wish they had
Good documentation of carrying the objects through the whole thing ties the whole story together, I think, in a way that just talk about people, the dates when they're done.
And they all ended up in the same place, which was really,
Yeah.
yeah.
it has a complete
Yeah,
to it.
it's,
The other thing that I thought, again, this comes back to the value of naming names, keeping documentation of the family history, of who they were, where they were from. The death and the arrivals are all of those things are really useful for, to retain family history. I thought it was interesting. Your grandfather, great grandfather, had that hotel restaurant
Yeah.
called the Sacagawea. Well, there's one in Stockton as well. My grandmother, who was a big, she stayed at hotels as opposed to motels.
Oh, yeah.
And when we went to see her sister-in-law in Lewiston, we made a trip up with I can't remember how we did this, because we went on train from Billings, but it didn't go all the way to Stockton. It had to go by bus part of that way. But Stockton was where we stayed, and it had the Sacagawea Hotel in it. And that whole region is, they claim Sacagawea as kind of their,
Yeah.
their
Claim to fame.
claim to fame. There's a lot of where she was in that region, Lewis and Clark and all of that. Yeah, Lewis and Clark, that's named because of the Lewis and Clark going through there. But she traveled with them all the way to the coast. And so there's a lot of that component of the history. So there's some really good stuff there. And I think we're all appreciative of the style, that tool of using the objects to tell the story. Well, who's next? We have about 10 minutes. Is there another person who'd like to share?
I have it really short.
Okay.
I mean, all you guys.
Well, I read your story about the magpies to them last week. We enjoyed that.
Yeah. So it was possibly in the late 70s that Kay Wertz suggested we join the 5:30 p.m. exercise class. Good idea, I thought. One evening, Karen Martins was our substitute instructor. Kay said, I really like Karen. Let's try her 6 o'clock a.m. class. I told Kay that there was no way in the world that I was going to get up and go exercise at 6 a.m. Well, she talked me into it. And it was a life-changing experience to me. I became a morning person. It lifted my spirits. I was more self-confident. I was more self-disciplined, more self-confident in myself, and learned to enjoy the early morning atmosphere. Kate gave it up in a week, but I attended early morning aerobics class for years. Such good health benefits. I feel that it is one of the reasons I have reached this ripe old age.
And you still go early.
Yeah, I'm still doing it.
Yeah, it's good. So comments about what she included. It is short.
Yeah,
You look at that,
is it ever?
but it's short, but there's quite a lot in there for no longer than 9 lines. So what are some thoughts and observations about that little bit that she wrote?
Her determination to not get up, and then the instigator sleeping in, and then giving it up because she didn't want to get up early. It was good, but it's
Well, I would have never guessed, once you talked me into this, that I would like it.
And that came through, that just a
surprise.
little surprise event in your life, just kind of a casual, hey, let's go exercise,
That made a difference.
made so much difference in your life, and it's something that you've continued to this day. Yeah, it kind of, to me, it really pounded home the fact that this was a historical turning point in your
Well, it
life.
was. It really
Something
was.
small can be
Yeah.
that much
I
difference.
consider that a life-changing experience.
Okay. So we have about 8 minutes.
I can give a real short synopsis of part of
Okay, yeah.
mine, because I think mine's really different. I titled mine How the Franco-Prussian War Collided with World War II in My Family. And I don't know if you guys know much about Prussia, but they were a very militaristic country that was in northern Germany. They were in constant war since the Middle Ages. They were just really, really aggressive. And so they came up with a conscription sometime around 1500 that every male born in Prussia would serve 7 years in the Army, beginning at the age of 20. And when they got out, then they would be in the reserves until they were 36. Well, the result of this, because they were involved, you're going to be in a war in 7 years if you were a Prussian soldier, at least once, maybe 3 times. So every father in Prussia had post-traumatic stress syndrome, and they were abusive. And so the kids were all messed up. And then the male kids got inducted into the Army and got their own post-traumatic stress order. I mean, this was a messed up country. And that's where all of my father's family came from. They were all Prussians. And so my great-grandfather, he was horrific. When my grandmother married my grandfather, he was 54 years old, and he told them they could purchase the farm from him, and he never worked another day in his life, and my grandparents paid for the farm 3 times over, and he never deeded it to them. So when my father graduated high school, and he talked with the brothers. One brother wanted to get married, one brother was too young. He said, I'll go, I'll serve. And the day after graduation in May of 1944, he signed up for the U.S. Army. And the very next day, my great-grandfather, Fred Funk, shows up and berates him for joining the wrong army. He wanted him to join the German Wehrmacht. And my dad exploded. He didn't like his grandfather anyway, and told him maybe he'd better just go back to Germany, join the Wehrmacht himself, and die for the Führer. And that was basically the last time they really ever spoke. I never knew them. They lived about 4 blocks from where I grew up. I didn't even know they were there. I went to their house one time when I was 4 years old. I don't know why. I was met at the door. I was with my parents. And I remember my great-grandmother said, you go sit in the sitting room and you wait. That's all that was said to me. So I go in there. I remember it was like walnut panel, dark curtains, barely open, so it's really dark in there. There's no television. I'm 4. But there's this great, huge, snowy owl, stuffed, sitting on a wooden pedestal in the middle of the room. So I go and I sit on the settee, and I stay there, because I am scared shitless. I'm 4. My mother finally comes and get me. We get in the car and we go home. Don't know why I was there. Don't know what this was all about. And so the other thing that happened, I missed that part of it. My grandfather got multiple sclerosis beginning about in 41 or so, and was very ill. My dad in 44, by I think June, he was in his training camp. And a year later, the armistice, the war ends in Germany. And so every time there was a war, Fred Funk would deed the farm over to my grandfather Welmer. After the war was ended, he'd want the deed back. So beginning world in December 7th, 1941, when we declare war on Germany, he deeds the farm over to Welmer. And when my dad was in the service in 45, he wants the deed back. So he gets the deed back. As soon as he got that deed, he kicked my sick grandfather and my grandmother and my father's youngest brother off the farm, and they are now homeless. My dad got back from World War II, and he was really livid. And so, I mean, this guy was as dysfunctional as you could get. He lived off of my grandparents' money that they were giving him for all those years, from 1918 to 1945, then kicks him off the farm because Welmer is sick. Can you imagine doing that to your own child? I can't. I mean, it's just horrific. And I never knew them. They were never at any family gatherings of the Funk family, Christmas, Easter, never. They lived a lonely, bitter, solitary life, both him and her, and they both deserved it. That's how I looked at it.
Well, you have quite a history, and I'm looking forward to seeing you put it all together. Dave, we will read yours tomorrow, next Friday, okay? And then this is, your prompt for this coming week.
Oh, good. Because I was wondering what that
Well,
was.
I have a feeling you have already written it because it's called The Most Influential Person.
Oh, that's hard to determine.
I know, well, I, on the back of this, gave you a little tiny synopsis of the most, I would say she maybe wasn't the only influential, but perhaps the most influential person in our family, my grandmother, on my dad's side. And I did a summary of her. And so I did include this because I am gonna have you write about another influential person later, in one of the next prompts. But sometimes we have somebody that lives in our home that technically is not a family member, but they influenced us. If you choose to write about that person, fine. But coming up, we are gonna be doing, I have on that sheet that I gave you, there will be people in, this one is most influential person. The next one is people and places, and you might, because we've kind of been doing that, and it feels maybe repetitive, but I keep thinking some of it may just be revision. You know, taking what you've already written and maybe looking at what I give you as a prompt, and then you say, well, I could expand on this, I can pull it out, I can blow this part of it up and make it longer. But I kept thinking, there are so many influential people in our lives, but there is somebody frequently that, you know, plays a really instrumental role in how your life worked. Like in our grandmother's case, she was such a staunch believer in education that all of us have college educations. And we weren't the only ones. She hired Fanny Sackett, who was a gal from KC. She made sure that she finished high school so that she could get a further education. Hired her so she could work at the hotel and still live, because there wasn't a high school in Buffalo or in KC then. She saw to it that other people got college educations by helping to fund them. So she was involved with all kinds of community things. My sister Joan says, I don't want to do that, but I get involved with a lot of community things, and I think it's because she influenced me so much. So she played a big part in our lives in lots of ways. She was intrepid, and she was one of the very first people to drive cars here all over the county. She was county superintendent of schools and gave up the horse and buggy because she didn't like doing them. So she drove the car and then drove to Barnum and all these places. You know, she drove the mountain. Lots of different car things. So she was really a powerful influence on my life. So you may pick one person, or you may find you're going, okay, it's hard to pick. Maybe you'll end up writing more than one. But Anita, I'm going to give that back to you, but I'm really hoping that you'll do a little tweaking on that and give it back to me, because I would like to it just was really fun to read. I read that to them last week since you were going to be on, and I wanted them to hear the story about the magpies because I thought they were so sweet. That was just great. And I'll give you these back. I had already kind of given you some of this, but
Oh, thank you.
so with all of that, are there any questions or any comments or anything so far? What have you, are there things that I could be doing differently or better? Helping you out more?
No, I'm happy.
I missed the first meeting, so I wasn't too sure how some of this works. Right now, to this point, I see we're hearing a lot, but do we need to pass something to you for editing?
Well, I'll tell you, if you can send it to me or give it to me for reading and editing, I am certainly, that was part of the intent, was that I would be able to help edit and be able to provide you some feedback.
That's the main thing,
And
getting
so
more
if you-
feedback on this.
Yeah, if you would like to have some feedback on it, please make sure I get copies of whatever. And if you don't want to use an email to communicate with me, Danica probably can show you how to send attachments, but you can give me, just print off 2 copies so that you have one, and then I can go back and read it. I'm more than happy to do that.
And I don't have email right now.
Okay, all right. Well, if you don't,
I
then,
would give you a hard copy maybe.
That would be fine. and then I can give you back
Give
the,
some feedback.
I would be happy to do that. That was the intent from the beginning, is to be able to provide some kind of, but I think it's helpful to hear from each other,
Oh, yeah.
because there are lots of you that are picking up on the strengths of other people's writing. And at the same time, in addition to that, then it gives you some insight as to how you can expand on what you're writing. I really am hoping I'll get a chance to read more of yours because it sounds like an interesting story. Your Vietnam, post-Vietnam experience, or is it pre-part? It's post? Okay, well, I would be interested in reading that. I find that it's I'm a reader as much as I am a listener, and so it's easier for me sometimes to work with the concrete form of it. So okay. So if there's any other questions, let me know. So,
What's our deadline to get this all together for the book? Is there a deadline, Danica?
The book, so the funding has to be used by the end of June. So
Okay.
if you are interested in compiling this all into the book, I think this is week 4, so we have 4 weeks left.
actually,
Okay,
Is that right?
yeah, and
I
Counting,
need to
right?
get all my edits done.
yeah, and that's what I was going to say is today is the 4th. We will not be meeting the week of Easter. Good
Okay,
Friday, that weekend, I don't want to have to, I have Good Friday services and stuff to attend, so I'm not going to be available. And so I skipped a week, and so in that length of time, maybe you could also work on doing some
yeah,
editing.
getting some of the editing.
And the editing, because you all have got some just wonderful things to put together in book form. And if you, like, Gladys brought some photographs of hers. If you have photographs of something, then we need to get them so that Danica can scan them into her program so she can transfer them into the books. Because
Okay.
she's gonna be doing a lot of that part of it. But if you've got photos, I would love it if you have a chance, Sam, to have you put those, even 3 pictures of the monkey up on the shelf, the leather Bible, the Winchester, the
Leather
the
suitcase
chest.
or
And I
case,
just
yeah.
thought, those are so vivid. And I
Yeah.
would love to have photographs of, it'd be neat to have the photographs accompanying your story.
Okay.
So if you can even just take, telephone pictures or something and send it to Danica, then she
Yeah.
can, that's a,
And I'll bring that book next week. I have it, but it's in my car, so I won't make everybody wait because it's sitting there.
okay, all right.
But,
Just say that what-
Yeah, show you an example of what we can do
Okay.
with the photos and such.
Terrific.
And then there are the trunks. that
Okay,
they
well, I
still
will
haven't
give
eaten
you-
into the
and if you
20s, the ones that
have-
strap on the
maybe
back
you
of the
could,
cars.
I'll just give you this.
Yes, that'd be
I'll
awesome.
give this one today.
I would love to.
Oh,
You
okay.
better write it down, so.
Yeah, I don't think
Oh,
But it was
Put my
before,
name on my
they
knees and
put 'em on the
figure it
wagon
out.
back in the day.
Jim, I was gonna ask a question, it has nothing to do with the
I
writing.
know.
Did you know the Padulas in Claremont?
The kids must have gone
Yeah.
into that.
I did not live there.
Oh,
but
The
I
kids.
heard the
Did
name.
you too?
Well, my cousin is very,
Oh, really?
What's her
Joan
name?
Padula, and her dad
Right.
worked on the railroad and lived in Claremont. And
Leather to
Marie,
us, that
Mary,
one.
That
no,
was, I think,
they
well,
were obviously
well
very
away.
Italian.
Yeah,
I think her
So
name
it
was
was
Rose,
an heirloom as much as
and they lived in that area, and I just
a
wondered.
trunk
if
from
they-
Hoover's.
Right, yeah.
Yes.
It became an heirloom, that's
I
kind of
heard
the
the
plan,
name, I got several
because she used it all the time, and then it
series
just,
of books.
it was with the family. Like,
Yeah, and I don't know whether that was included or not.
Yeah, it was made
But
actually.
I'll have,
you know,
I just
they
thought,
put
since you
leather
were talking
together,
about
not
being
it's
from
got
there,
the
that maybe. you-
Iron nails that are bent
Most of
over
my
on the
family's
inside.
history back there, but I was
Yeah.
there.
So you probably.
So is Tuesday on this class?
Yeah.
Not really, kind of,
Well,
last week.
Yes, that one I recognize.
My folks knew.
Oh,
It was me and Mitch,
Chrissy
This
Bowles,
is
her
the
was
one.
one of our,
It's given that
this
class.
is her high school friend.
The back